So for those of you who were here 5 minutes ago, we were talking about this flywheel effect and recycling content and things like that. Well, here I am again, so happy to be here. Yeah, so everyone, this is a critical topic that we're starting to see evolving right now in the entire healthcare ecosystem. And you've heard big things happening just across the entire AI use case spaces, everything from the implementation of quality management systems, the evolution of CE and regulatory guidelines, the implementation of the AI Act, which is currently ongoing, and how all of these things are impacting us across the healthcare ecosystem. Healthcare, of course, being one of the high-risk categories, so it's fundamental we know about this, we consider this, and we also see how do we apply it in reality. But maybe taking a step back, and again, going into this kind of entire space, what is digital medicine? The way we've kind of been thinking about digital medicine as a scope and a field is it's where data and computational techniques come together to then generate novel insights across the healthcare continuum. So when we think about it, we imagine the patient really being at the center of this, in the kind of precision medicine space. But then you can go upstream into what we call enabling technologies. These are the fundamental infrastructures, the AI tools to discover new biology, to actually have the adoption and implementation of AI into the hospitals themselves. And then downstream of the patient is, of course, the treatment side. So how are we able to change, modulate patient behavior, and therefore actually improve outcomes over time? So with that entire kind of preface set, I'd love for our two panelists here to introduce themselves. And I think you'll find that Hélène is particularly focused on the latter half of that. And of course, Pall, you're much more on the actual QMS side of things. So please, Hélène.
So I'm Hélène Viatgé. I'm the co-founder and co-CEO of Agora Health. Agora Health is a venture studio dedicated to digital health. And we have a strong focus on medical devices. So not all the digital medicines that you've described just now, Simon, but really a strong focus on digital medical devices, so regulated devices, and with two main streamlines, one being tools for physicians, which are often AI-based, that are used to stratify your patients, predict the trajectories of your patients, and so on. And then tools for patients really dedicated to patients, so apps, digital therapeutics, and so on. And the idea really with Agora Health is to go from all these ideas to actually tools that are used. And we feel that there is a big step missing between the actual development and R&D being performed and the usage on the field by physicians and patients, and trying to really fill the gap between innovation and adoption.
Oh.
Yeah, pleasure to be here. So I represent the clinical department, if you like, of Greenlight Guru. Greenlight Guru is a software company providing software solutions for medical device companies throughout the whole lifecycle of their device, so QMS, clinical data capture, and what we call the academy. And I think the reason that I'm here is I just absolutely love data. I'm a data nerd, and I've been in this space. I essentially founded a company called Smart Trial that was acquired last year by Greenlight Guru, which was that data capture component. And I've been in the space of working with medtech entrepreneurs, medical device companies, and seeing the different waves, if you like, of digital health and e-health and all these terms that we've seen along the way, blockchain and now AI. And I think this is probably the most intriguing part in my perspective in terms of applicability, so I'm excited about our discussion.
All right, very cool. So we're going to treat this as a conversation, so if anyone in the audience has questions and things, just, please do throw your 2 cents in here, because that's where we like this. So I guess maybe let's kind of reposition things a little bit again. I mean, when we think about investing in technologies, we think about it, there are kind of 3 fundamental ways of doing this. One is to invest into companies which are looking at an existing technology with a new channel. Netflix is a perfect example of this. So it's the same existing content we've known for years, decades even, and suddenly in a new approach. So you actually have it on demand, for example. What we've classically done in biotech and medtech, we've done new technology with an existing channel. So we'll develop totally novel therapeutic agents or approaches. We'll develop new medical devices. And then traditionally, we'll plug into the sales and distribution channels that are well known to us. So medical device companies, pharma, for example, perfect example. When we get to where we're at now in this digital medicine space, we'll actually see that there's both a new technology and a new channel risk that potentially plays itself here. So if I kind of break this down, where I see is Hélène, you're working on that new channel component, and of course, you still need to build the new technology, or somebody does, and that's Pall, where you're providing the services to be able to really do that. So when we kind of think about that space and that kind of component of it, what are the critical pieces that we need to start thinking about in terms of regulation, safety, and explainability? And maybe let's start with the data capture, the data collection. Pall, over to you. What's kind of the fundamental there?
It follows the principle of garbage in, garbage out, right?
Yep.
And I think that's where everybody's mind starts, right? If you want to build continuous learning algorithms, you need to ensure that the data that you're trying to teach on is accurate and has the certain, quality standard, if you like. And that's probably the first issue. I'm not even sure that people can solve that individually. I think Hélène can probably pitch in on that one too. But then in terms of the regulation, and this is interesting, the more I thought about it, the more I've come to the conclusion that regulations are by nature always reactive to technology, right? So we are not in a position from a regulatory perspective where you could say that this can be approved in that setting or this setting, because it quite frankly just doesn't exist. But I do think that the better the input, the better the output in the foundation of actually collecting the data. And we were discussing this, on a quick call last Friday, and we even talked about, people are so excited about technology, but a lot of us are still using paper, right? We're still in analog methods, and we're talking about AI. There's some misalignment here between what we want to do and what is exciting to do and what we actually have at our disposal.
So fundamentally, we've already got this massive issue of just, do we get anything but garbage to even build models on as well?
Yeah, and I think on data capture, there are lots of points to address. One being that the physicians actually capture the data during their clinical times, but in different tools than the one that will be used for research and development. So you will find in most countries physicians reduplicating really the data they have collected in their clinical pathway for research and development of new algorithm. In terms of regulatory, I think everyone is progressing in the right direction. There are lots and lots of new warehouse for health data that is being set up in France, in Europe. I think in Europe there is the European Health Data Storage. So, things and the infrastructure is starting to be in place really to allow for a way more adaptive and way more quick way to access the data. But you will still find so many physicians developing AI-based medical devices on data sets that are not always compliant in terms of patient consent. So, again, I think a few months ago, I had a cardiologist coming to me with a nice algorithm, really good, great CStat, so strong one. And when I dived into the contract in place for the data collection and the training data set, it was being done in the research team, used by the research team, and no contract in place. You won't go far with that. You won't go with FDA or EMA with something like this. So there are still lots of education, infrastructures to put in place to allow for a simple data capture.
So even if you've just generated the data sets, of course, we need to make sure that it can be leveraged in the context of whatever's applicable.
You can use it.
So it's not research use only, suddenly translated into this.
True.
And I guess this is something that we're seeing is pretty different in digital medicine, whereas in the past, let's say, when you were developing hardware or you had some anecdotal evidence for maybe a new biological pathway, you didn't necessarily have to have that patient data or patient consent piece of the puzzle. Now suddenly you do. So integrating that already into the first phases of when you're building a product, not even necessarily thinking about the next stages of it.
Which takes time.
Yeah, huge amounts. But what about the next step of that? So you've built your AI, now you need to validate it. What does that look like? And where are we kind of seeing the hurdles? Because we are dealing with people, to the one hand. This is patient data, of course, on the other. And whereas what we found interesting in digital medicine is it kind of sits between medicine on the one hand, which we know traditionally, and then technology on the other, which has more of a run fast and keep iterating approach. Where are we kind of thinking about how this now needs to fit in from that, again, quality management, compliance, taking that into account to be able to actually build stuff? But to your point, also, Pall, it was regulation is very static. Mm-hmm. Where do we kind of need to find that middle ground that works here?
I think essentially some of it has been found in certain solution types, right? So if you take image diagnostics, it is, you can debate if it's AI or if it's just predictive analytics. Like if you're literally just, using your model to, assume something, but it doesn't necessarily learn over time, so it's not continuously learning.
Yep.
It's not a continuous learning model.
Okay, so it's static. It's fixed in time.
Exactly. You
Okay.
basically take it. You say, we'll teach it up to a point
Yep.
where it has a sensitivity or it detects at a certain rate, for example, a tumor on an image, and then we'll basically make it static. So we'll take that and lock it in place, and then we can go through the traditional validation routes that you would with medical device software, if you like, or software as a medical device, and then you can get it approved and you can put it to the market. The component that and if anybody in the audience has seen anything else that I haven't seen, at least yet, is anything that's continuously learning. Right? That's just contradicting what the regulation says. Like, regulation is, we know what happens. Like, I've validated that this is how I made the device, this is how it's going to act, these are the known risks, this is the probability of failure, and it is acceptable to us as authorities, if you like, to put this into humans, if you like. And on AI, there's still just and I think maybe we're overacting on some of these things, but on AI, there's still this distance between it's like a black box to a lot of people, right? They don't know what to expect. There's no way of calculating risk other than the risk is 100% probability of fail, right? Like similar to the regular software standards, that's why you have in the IEC 62304 standard, there is always the last component that can't be software, right? Like software has a probability of 100% of failing. That's what the standard says. That's how we regulate it. So if you take AI and say the probability of failing is 100%, you're never going to get it to patients, which is probably also like not what we want. We want to use technology to advance healthcare the best we can.
Yeah.
And I think in terms of the iteration as well, so you certify your medical device, and as you've mentioned, it's often done, you've learned, and then you freeze your model, really. It won't move. And
so
then
now you know the performance. This is the performance of
exactly.
my model on this
It's validated,
population.
and you get your CE mark or your FDA approval. And then if you want to do minor changes or major changes, then you have to go through all the usual notified body communication and process for them to validate. And that takes time. And we all know that notified body are way overwhelmed for MDR reasons and so on. So explaining to them that you want to update your model every 2 months, it's not something they are happy with. I mean, yes, they can charge you, but they don't have time for that. So you basically fall into a situation where you submit amendments and changes of your AI model on a regular basis, and they cannot really follow. So there is a big risk in terms of them saying, yes, we validate it, without really having the expertise to do so. So I think it's also about dealing with the fact that digital solutions, we are used to upgrades in an app every week, every day sometimes, and it doesn't fit into the regulatory landscape with
That's a really interesting point. Actually, this is going to be a topic we haven't discussed or prepped as a panel, so
Sure.
let's go completely off the board here. No, but you're bringing up a really interesting point, which is you need to start thinking about quality management and regulatory from a tactical perspective.
Sure.
How much do you play it, in fact? How much do you skirt the issue, but at the same time be able to create, I guess, the competitive barriers of the validation required to then get your product to market on the one hand, but also get enough, let's say, buy-in for people to reimburse and do that. So what are kind of the nuances you can think about when looking at it and saying, okay, do I actually go for maybe a clinical decision support solution versus a full-blown, let's say, class 2, class 3 medical device? Are there things to play with here, or is it really just more of actually it depends on the use case?
I think there are, but I think it depends on what you put under your CE marking or FDA approval.
Yeah.
So depend on the level of details that you give to the notified body in terms of what's the algorithm. And then if you've scheduled this correctly and in a clever way, you can probably make the algorithm evolve from time to time and explain or justify that it's a minor adjustment instead of a major one.
Okay.
And the other point is you have a validation data set. Usually if you have your AI regulated, so you have a training data set and then a external validation data set. The larger it is and the most complete it is, the the quicker you will be to revalidate new iterations. So if you
Yeah.
want to do new iterations and you have all the data sets available for you to reuse, that's perfect. If then you realize that you are missing some data in your external validation data set, then you're
Then you sit there and go, oh, sugar. What am I
exactly.
going to do now?
Oh, sugar. That's the word. Do you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it probably comes down to us, figuring out the applicability of machine learning or AI in general, like in our solutions, right? So you can design your solution so that you not necessarily evade regulations, but you kind of slide yourself into maybe a little bit of a software regulatory class. But you could also, think about other applications for the technology in our healthcare system. So one thing that I personally think we're going to see probably faster than we're going to see the latest technology in devices being used on humans is the technology being used on our healthcare systems. So on a more, and that's medtech too, right? Like to analyze effective care pathways, to figure out where the best outcomes can be found for certain, patient phenotypes, and essentially at a macro level rather than a specific level, is where I would put my money if I was.
Okay, gotcha. So it's
a
much
betting
more,
man.
if you're thinking about it from a kind of hospital workflow perspective of what is the optimization you can get there. So you're actually having clinical benefit, but you're also, I guess, having a healthcare economic benefit for the hospital, for the payer systems. You won't necessarily, though, impact, let's say, the AI won't directly impact the patients.
Exactly. And I think it goes back to like, AI sounds so fancy, and I do apologize if I'm trying, and I'm not smart enough to even understand it myself, all of it. But I would say that, there's been a lot of work done on, regression modeling for example, healthcare systems. So an interesting project, probably more than 15 years ago now that I was exposed to, was analyzing whether you could predict, patient load at a certain hospital center based on the geography of that center, based on the, prevalence and incidence rates of diseases in the area, and the weather, and, the time of year, and whatever else variables you could put into it, so that we could then plan our staffing for, for that certain hospital site. And that's not necessarily AI, but if you then made that a continuous learning model, it would get smarter and smarter over time. But in its essence, it's just a regression model. Like, it's literally some standard coefficients, if you like, that you then multiply the probability of how many patients you're going to see in a given department.
And then you can have that very specific per hospital, I guess, or per function even.
Exactly.
But that brings us really interesting to another topic, which, again, I'm a bit of a geek when it comes to these things, so I find this super interesting. But it's also that static nature that we were talking about a model. So you've trained your AI, it's a class 2 medical device, let's say, fully validated, etc. But you've trained it, I don't know, let's say hypothetically in Stockholm, on a patient population which is coming out of Karolinska Institute, for example. And then suddenly you're going to go and deploy that now, maybe in other countries or, totally different heterogeneous populations, etc. Do we need translation? Is that just okay, or are we going to get the same performances, or what are the kind of hurdles and challenges? Even eventually, I mean, we just had a session before, the impact on the business models and such. What's kind of your thoughts there?
Depends. No, it's obviously it depends. You have to justify why the population is similar and how you feel that your validation is valid, and if not, then you have to reproduce it. So I mean, in my past business in renal transplantation, we had validation data sets in the US, but also in Europe, and trying to develop some in Asia, because it's always different populations, and you kind of have to justify as well that the care pathway is being different. So it's not only about the racial situation or the demographic, it's also about the care pathway. So if your patients are followed very frequently or not frequently, what are the tests being done? Because sometimes the data you need for your validation is actually not available in one country because they don't do biopsy, for instance. So it's actually really tricky.
So there's a lot about the data collection already back into this, and then hence that might change, or the patient populations will be different, so hence the actual outcomes of the algorithms are totally different then.
Yes, and as I think we've mentioned when we speak as well, care pathway changes. So if you've developed your data set, your algorithm on a way of working, and then 3 years later or 5 years later, you're finally on the market, but then things have changed.
Standard of care is something totally different.
Kind of. Or new drugs have come, and
I can't help making the comparison to like all other devices, right? Like it's not that different when you then put it in this perspective where you say, well, I did my clinical trials on this population in this area, and you want to go to another market, you take your device to Japan.
Yep.
They're going to look at you and say, why are you certain that there are not additional risks introduced from our care pathway or from our population, demographics and things like that? So it's actually not that different from regular devices when push comes to shove, if you like, and that you're going to get the same questions.
From that static perspective, I guess you're totally right. But it's as soon as you can say, well, actually, now when we think about it, digital medicine has the power to iterate continuously. If we give it that ability, where suddenly we're saying, actually, we need to lock it in place. We need to maintain that static nature of it. I guess that's a huge difference, at least in my mindset, of what could be the power on the one hand, but isn't on the other. But maybe on that subject, and you've raised a really interesting one, it's how much do you feel that the healthcare system is aware of all of these issues that potentially are being faced? Because I mean, we speak with physicians all the time when we're looking at interesting investments. And they say, yeah, it sounds great. We've tested it in our systems and it seems to be working. But fundamentally, they know nothing about how these systems work. Do you think that's going to need to change in the future? Or is it still a bit like a therapeutic? Actually, as long as it works in the patients, you'll take it and do it what it says in the packet.
I think it might be, when you look at technology just in general in healthcare, it takes so much time for adoption. Again, like we're still working on paper forms with a lot of the stuff. Like in a lot of healthcare systems, we talked about, recepts in France, right? Like the prescriptions, English. Prescriptions in France, right? That they're still being done on paper. And so you have that component, and we are fundamentally risk adverse when it comes to healthcare, right? It doesn't take more than one failure, one patient to die, one serious adverse event for everybody to throw their hands in the air and say, I'm not touching that thing again.
Or
right?
for Europe to change the regulation.
Or change the regulation, exactly.
We'd never do that. Oh, we did, right?
No, sorry.
So I think, to me, it's like we need to figure out what is our risk appetite when it comes to using the technology and to what end, right? So if you paint a picture of just healthcare and technology and health tech in general, usually when I was explaining my business back in the days when I was searching for investors, I had to make this, I made like a circle and said, well, you'll see that the population is ever aging, we're getting more chronic diseases, we're also getting wealthier, which means we're going to pay for more healthcare, which means we're going to live longer and get more chronic disease and pay for more. So it's like a circle that keeps spinning and keeps growing. So the market is, unless we do something else, is just going to continue to expand in general. And then when you look at, like, people want to live longer and be healthier, to which end can we use technology to do that? And is there a willingness to pay for that? And are we willing to accept the risk? Right? At which point do we accept the risk that we leave it to AI to decide which treatment I'm going to have for a cancer? Is it after I tried all the others and then I get to that point and then it's acceptable for me as a patient? And again, how do we even regulate that? So, and I know I've just taken us down a rabbit hole.
But this, I think, is the power of also this kind of space, because the reality is you can start framing it and shifting it in whichever way you want to. But you've opened up a really interesting topic there for me, Pall. It's also, we're very reactive as a healthcare system today. When we're starting to look at what digital medicine also can bring to this in the future, it's almost becoming proactive, or at least, let's say, participative and eventually proactive, and eventually moving that entire needle away from just, okay, you've fallen ill, now we treat. Now you can actually start taking part in that. Hélène, I'd love to get your perspective on this in terms of the requirement, therefore, for trustworthiness from one, I think, the clinician's perspective, but also the patient's perspective of these types of solutions. So as you were saying, you've got clinical decision support solutions, you've got digital therapeutics, etc. Is that something that really enters into the game, or is it more just as long as it has a regulatory stamp, do you think that's enough or sufficient?
No, I think there is a big gap. I mean, the regulatory stamp is necessary,
Yeah.
but it's not enough. And also on your former questions about the healthcare system, I think the healthcare systems have actually realized that there was significant work to be done on the regulatory part, and they've done it. They've worked on the regulation, they worked on the infrastructure. There are still lots of improvements to be made, fine. Now they are looking into business models and how do we actually get the industry to go there, and they are moving towards reimbursing as medical devices apps and hopefully AI-based solutions for physicians as well. So I'm thinking that they are trying to accelerate the field.
So the payers are saying, yes, we should do this.
And then obviously the last point is about adoption, and clinicians currently, I think, are in between. They know there is value behind those solutions. They know they should be able to use them, but it's still way too complicated for them to be able to use them in their clinical practice seamlessly. Like really, and interoperability is a nightmare, and then they have to duplicate work and so on. So I think we are in this in-between situation where the IT system in most clinical institutions is far behind all the industry. and as a result, they are struggling because they want to use these things. I think they know there are more and more clinical evidence available to prove that these solutions are efficient and will make patient care better. However, it's not really doable within their work resources. So what they do is mostly they use those tools, but outside any regulated landscape, and they use in-house developed tools within their IT system only, so they will never try to replicate this outside and make a business out of it. But they are using these tools. They are, I think they are more and more convinced about the efficiency of those tools. However, we need to really bridge the gap between the wonderful AI algorithms that are being developed and the paper-based clinical data that is actually being used in the care pathway.
Okay, that's an interesting kind of stranglehold situation. You need to unlock the one to get the other then.
Yes.
So maybe thinking about that then from a practical perspective, how do you kind of think about what's enough, let's say, provision of trust, provision of regulatory insight versus too much? So we now find this happy middle ground, I guess. And I'm thinking about this more from a company's perspective that wants to build something here rather than the regulator's perspective, which I think will always be much more risk averse. But where would you think about this? How can these companies navigate most efficiently this regulatory quagmire, I guess, that we've created for ourselves? Is there kind of any particular learnings that you've had that you'd say, this I wish I'd known 12 months ago, 24 months ago, now that I can apply?
I'll start
Yes.
because I've got one. I think for AI-based algorithm, at least, there is a really clever balance to get between the input data and the output data. And you can design the most brilliant algorithm with a great predictivity and sensibility, but with 12 input data that are actually not available in the current care pathway.
So like patient data compliance would be an issue,
or just you don't do this blood test regularly enough, or you actually, when you do the blood test, you don't collect this specific data. So yes, your algorithm is extremely good with this data, but will it be good without this data and with the data that is already in the care pathway? It's a bit like what you started by saying, innovation in the tech and innovation in the process. I think there is a nice balance to get between my algorithm is good enough and better than the standard of care with this data, and I don't want to reach for the sky. I'm just going to be better than what's already available, because if I go and try to improve my algorithm more and more and more, the data that will be needed won't be available, and you will never be able to deploy your algorithm in current care. So I think the balance really in terms is, and I wish I had known that before, is between input and output, and also between like looking at the care pathway in each hospitals, because it's never the same. despite guidelines and national or international guidelines in terms of care pathway, you will find differences in most hospitals. There are some common standards. You need to rely on them for your algorithm. So look at that before trying to develop the best algorithm. I would say that this input data, output data is quite important.
Yeah, I would just, maybe just add a little bit of an angle to that is when if you want to go into building a health tech solution that has components of AI in it, I would say figure out the shortest way to, the money, if you like. Figure out the shortest way to revenue, to be honest, because if you can spend a lot of time, like you said, improving on algorithms, improving on, integrations into different things, but when push comes to shove, nobody wants to pay for it. If we're not willing to accept the risk you're introducing, or we're not willing to accept your business case from a payer's perspective, either the patient or the system, you can develop anything you like. You're not going to survive as a business. So on that perspective, it's just find that balance, like you said, as soon as you can, and even smaller things, and then growing from there. Incremental improvements over time are usually a safer bet than the big leap that I'm going to completely change the way we do heart surgery or
the 2.0 revolution, rather.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. The thing I love about both of your models and the way you kind of structured your companies is also you're providing this very important service layer, if you will, for everyone now developing novel integration, basically novel applications and such. I mean, Pall, on your side on the data capture, the quality management system that goes with it, Hélène on kind of also that regulatory support layer of it. I think in the future, what do you think the space is going to do? Is it going to continuously build its own internal, let's say each company has its own regulatory requirements and regulatory practices, or is it actually going to be a bit more like we've seen in antivirus software? Each company actually focuses on building what it does best, and then will buy in a third-party service provider. So ultimately, you guys become an underlying platform that everyone else can now build on top of.
I think, I might be completely wrong on this, but I do think that we're going to see more solutions that integrate together in different components of that pathway. I don't think we're going to have some fundamental thing that everybody needs to kind of integrate into as such, but I think that we'll see the verticals expand where somebody gets really good at one thing. And I think one of the, if you look at it from a healthcare system perspective, you'll find that even in a country like Denmark with 5 million people in 5 different healthcare regions, they could only agree on 3 different electronic patient record systems, right? So they ended up trying to get it down to that, but now implementation is a nightmare because guess what? They don't work in the same way across these 5 different regions. So the systems don't match the care pathway. So they're struggling with implementation. Instead of going for verticals and saying, well, you're going to need this component and this component and this component, and make sure that you force the vendors to work together, for a better outcome. That's what my take on it would be. And I think that's going to be similar in this perspective that everybody wants to own the data right now, which I completely understand. There's a lot of value in owning the data set. And if you have a valuable data set, then ultimately it's going to be somebody wants to get their hands on that data set to train or to use it in their business. But you'll find that, I think that the more we open it up, if you like, the better it's going to be for us as a healthcare system. Is there a business in that?
We'll see.
Anybody's guess is as good as mine.
I think one thing we may see is in the digital world, you had AOL a while ago, and then you had the explosion of all those technical breaks, Stripe, and so on. So kind of segmentation on just one task to be performed. And now, after like all those years, we are seeing the aggregation again in some, solution like Notion and so on. I think in the digital health space, we are still at that stage where some companies think they can do everything on their own. And when you try to deploy an algorithm, you will be asked by physicians, can I have a break for prescription? Can I have a break for data collection? And can I do this and this and this? And never do that. I mean, the physician will tell you, I won't be able to adopt your algorithm if I don't have all the bricks around. But I think it would be a stupid mistake to kind of try to do everything. And I think we should really, and I hope we will see in the coming years, more and more digital health companies going and specific, like really targeting one brick, and then being way more into this API integration stack mindset that we've seen in the digital field, because that's necessary for the adoption. I mean, you won't find a one solution fit all for the physician world. They all need something specific. So you need to be prepared to see really this technical bricks working together.
And I guess all of that built on kind of the standardized quality management, regulatory compliance things. It's funny, one of the things that we've seen a lot is a growing kind of, let's say, interest from the healthcare community now of saying, look, I want this trustworthiness, I want this explainability. And what they're valuing more and more is companies that are able to show the metrics of this is the functionality of my algorithm or the products and services I'm offering, versus a competitor which say, let's just throw it out there. Here's a publication. Don't worry about the rest. We know what we're doing. How are you thinking about that tactically now as you build Agora as well? Is it something that you've kind of built in and baked into the true offering, or is it more of a, we will do this, but in the fullness of time?
No, we won't go with this clear mindset in view.
Okay.
I'm just thinking, I had a conversation with an academic team around bulimic, and they were not clear about the outcome. What do they want to prove? They were like, it's clear we need to do this and this will help the patient. And I was like, what's the clinical impact? Why are you doing this? And if you don't have that in mind, you will go nowhere. And it's not enough to say it will help the patient. You need to know what you want to prove and then just start collecting the clinical evidence about that. So really, it's we don't go in any businesses now without having this really clear view on this is the organizational impact or clinical impact, this is what we want to achieve, and this is a roadmap for data collection to prove what we are doing.
Clear. So I guess we're coming towards the end of our panel. I mean, for me, I've taken a couple of notes here, and I want to try and summarize things. So on the first aspect, data quality, the input of it, you get that wrong, you're basically stuffed from day one. I think we can all agree on that.
Yeah.
This is why platforms such as yours providing this quality management system, making sure that you know what is the data heterogeneity, the data ownership, and also the rights that are associated with it is so critical. On the second one, it's when you're actually validating that model. One of the problems that we do face in the space is still this very static nature. So build it, validate it, and then you're kind of stuck with that's the performance you've got until you go through the entire process again, if you choose to go down the regulatory path. If not, you have this ability to then try and navigate it from a tactical approach, but then you might have different claims or at least different kind of costs and or let's say pricing models that you can get to. And then I guess the third one, and being a bit, let's say, more pragmatic here, it's also that you can't build everything. You need to be able to rely on third-party services to then be able to support you in these approaches and things. But I guess ultimately it all boils down to today we're in a process of still seeing AI development and adoption happening. We need to continue that kind of regulatory journey of development, but then also the trustworthiness component of being able to say, look, we can demonstrate trust, we can demonstrate utility of these types of approaches. Is that a fair summary, or did I miss any kind of critical topics you think, oh, damn, we need to talk about that?
No, I think you're spot on. Exactly. It comes down to making sure that we understand the stakes that the different actors have. And the better we are at that from the regulatory perspective to the founders, to the startups, to the healthcare systems, to the patients, the sooner we're going to find a mutual playground, if you like, and then start evolving from there.
And grow the standards into the future, I guess, for everything we see.
Exactly.
Excellent. Hélène, Pall, thanks very much for taking the time.
Thank you.
Thanks all.